I want to thank you for all coming out this morning. What a great turnout for Cars and Coffee. I know we've got over 200 people that came this morning for Cars and Coffee. That's just tremendous. I'm really honored to talk to you again today about Route 66. I've given this presentation a few times, so you may have heard it. If you did, I apologize. That's pretty much of a repeat of what you've heard before. A few new slides, but it's just a fun topic, especially since Route 66 is going to be celebrating their 100th anniversary next year. It's hard to believe it's been 100 years since that road first was commissioned. I've always had a passion for the road. I think it's because I grew up, vacationing. Our family drove a lot on vacations, and we took Route 66. A lot didn't know it was Route 66 when I was a kid, but looking back and seeing the home movies and the photos, it's very easy to know that that was Route 66 that we were traveling on. I mentioned to my wife, Elaine, it's been 25 years ago, because it was the 75th anniversary of Route 66 when we first started traveling it. I watched a show on TV one night. It was on Route 66. I said, Elaine, when I retire, we really need to go try to drive that and experience that and see what we can relive. And she goes, well, we better do it before you retire, because there might not be much left by that time. So that year we took out, and I was in the funeral business, so I could only get away a week at a time. And so we would do it in segments in a week. It took us 10 years. So from 2001 to about 2011, all of our summer vacations, we drove a section of Route 66 till we finally got the entire route traveled. Since that time, we've gone back and revisited numerous sections because we just love it. We love the people, we love the experiences, we love staying in the mom and pop motels, in the mom and pop restaurants. It's always fun to see what's changed. Sometimes it's sad to see some things that you visited before that are no longer existing or been torn down. But it's always really fun to see somebody that's bought a place and rehabilitated it and keeping it alive and bringing it back. So anyway, it's always kind of fun to know what makes this road so popular. So let's talk about that. And so why is it so enduring? First, it's the first major route with good roadway that connected rural communities to major cities. And they didn't just pour a brand new road for Route 66. They used existing roads and highways, connecting communities with major cities. So the road was very curvy. Sometimes it was very sharp because it followed section lines. So you might have a 90-degree turn, which made Route 66 very dangerous in some spots. It's kind of interesting that not a lot of it was paved. Most of it was dirt road in those early days. It helped to make us a more mobile society, obviously, by connecting those routes. It was a lifeline to the West during the Dust Bowl years, the 1930s. We're going to talk about a little bit more on that shortly. It was critical to the war effort during World War II, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here shortly. It was a catalyst in the formation of new communities and countless new family-owned businesses along the route. It transports to exciting new vacation destinations. It's a way for us to connect to our past, and this really is a snapshot of American history. So this is a little bit, some just general facts. Route 66 is 2,448 miles long, and I say that, but that's not exactly correct because Route 66 changed over the years. It took different routes. An early route that went up to Santa Fe and back down to Albuquerque was only around for about 5 or 6 years, and that eliminated like 100 miles. They changed the route as time went on, but roughly 2,448 miles. Most maps no longer include it. If you look at a map, you're not going to probably find Route 66 on it, in case it says historic Route 66 or something like that. But you can find apps. There's all kinds of Google apps and that you can get now. When Lane and I first started traveling, that wasn't a thing you could do. We had a book. The second year we had a book. The first year we didn't have anything but a map, and we got lost a lot. But the second year we bought a book that really was a great guidebook, and we went back and later revisited some of those things we'd missed. But if you decide to go on it, be sure you follow an app or a guidebook so you don't miss anything. It was commissioned in 1926. It crosses 8 states and 3 time zones. Kansas is one of those states. We have an amazing 13 miles of Route 66, and we're very, very proud of it. It's down by Galena, Kansas. Starts in Chicago and ends in LA, and if you go the other way, you have to go in reverse, because that's what everybody always says. It goes from Chicago to LA, never from LA to Chicago. But the fun thing about that book we bought is if you decide to go from LA to Chicago, you turn the book around the other way, and it would go in reverse. So you could follow it the other way, and I thought that was pretty ingenious. In 1926, only 800 miles were paved. Not until 1937 was the entire route paved. We'll talk a little bit about that here in a moment. You can only drive parts of Route 66 today. I think I just read yesterday there's about 245 miles of existing road that you can still actually drive. A lot of it's either on private property that you don't have access to, or is underneath I-44, I-40, or some other highway. But the actual roadway, you can drive about 245 of the miles. And that was something we always tried to do. Even if we could only drive it for a mile before we had to exit off, we always tried to drive as much of the original route as we could do, just to see what we could find. It took 5 interstate highways to replace Route 66. I thought that was kind of amazing. It's also known as the Mother Road, the Main Street of America, and the Will Rogers Highway, and we'll touch on some of those as we go through the presentation this morning. It's also the title of a TV series from 1960-64 called Route 66. Maybe some of you remember that back in the day. I'm a little bit too young for that, but I have seen the show, but it's pretty good, following Buzz and Todd on their adventures. But not much of that was actually filmed on Route 66, even though it was called Route 66. Cyrus Stevens Avery from Tulsa is known as the father of Route 66, and we'll talk about him here in a moment. And then sadly, it was decommissioned in 1985 when the last highway bypassed all of Route 66. So anyway, that's just some facts about the route. Cyrus Stevens Avery is the guy that's kind of known as the father of Route 66. He was born in Pennsylvania. His family moved to Missouri when he was about 10 years old, and then he eventually got married after college and moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma as an insurance salesman. He got into farming, he got into oil, but he always loved roads and highways, and so he got involved very early on in the improvement of roads and eventually became a member of the Federal Highway System. Well, when the Federal Highway Act of 1921 came out that they were going to start to number highways, he got involved with that committee and the formation of the different highways. And there was a highway that was going to be going from Virginia to Los Angeles. And Cyrus Stephen Avery wanted the road to go from Chicago down through Springfield, Missouri, Tulsa, Oklahoma, and then across. So that original road from Virginia was going to be called Route 66. I'm sorry, Route 60. And when Cyrus Stevens Avery wanted the highway to go from Chicago to Los Angeles, they agreed on that road in addition to the other one, but they wanted to call it Route 62. And I guess I can kind of go to this next slide here. Cyrus Stephen Avery didn't like the Route 62 name. He says that's boring. Nobody's going to remember 62. And the thing with the highway numbering system, if it ended with a 1 or a 0, depending if it was north, south, or east, west, it was known as a major highway. And the states wanted to have a major highway in their state so people would travel there. Well, when Cyrus Stevens Avery turned down Route 62, he wanted Route 60. Kentucky, the state of Kentucky got all upset and said, no, because if we do that, then it's not going to go through Kentucky, and Kentucky won't have a major route, and we're not going to even be involved with the highway system then. So through some squabbles and whatnot, Cyrus Stevens Avery found out that Route 66 was still available as a number. He thought that had a catchy name to it, and so he decided to go with 66. And so that's how we got Route 66, even though it was almost Route 60. But kind of a fascinating story. But I find it interesting. We see this is the path of Route 66. You see it starts in Chicago, traverses Illinois and all of Missouri. Originally, it was going to go across a lot of Kansas through Colorado and down this way. Well, Cyrus Stevens Avery just talked him into coming down through Springfield, Missouri into Tulsa. I wonder why. You know, he's from Tulsa. But his convincing the highway department was that it would avoid the Rocky Mountains and the steep mountain range and better weather in the south, and it would be up in the north, so the highway would be more open, have more open days, and the highway department agreed with that. So that was the route that it eventually took. Like you see, just nipped Kansas just a little bit down there in the corner. We can kind of thank Henry Ford for a lot of things automotive-wise, because he was really the one that put not only the United States but the world on wheels. There were a lot of automobiles out in the early 1900s, but not a lot of mass-produced cars. Henry Ford was the one that really wanted a car to be available to the working individual. He started the $5 a day pay scale, 8-hour days, work days, but his employees could afford his own Model Ts, which really sold a lot of Model Ts. So when the Model T came out in 1908, it was about $800, still a little bit pricey. By the time the last one rolled off in 1927, they were under $300 a piece. So they went down in price every single year, something that cars still do today, right? But anyway, we can thank Henry Ford. He sold 15 million Model Ts. And at one point in time, Model T was 40% of the automobile population in the world. That says a lot about the Model T. but the roads were crummy back in those days. I mean, you think about in 1910, we had 180,000 registered vehicles, and by 10 years later, we had 7.5 million cars, and roads that looked, like that. Let me get back here. That crummy road we just looked at, and you can see how easy it'd be to get stuck in that muck. And so they knew that. Here's some other stats. 1921, 2.5 million miles of road were only paved, about 1% of hard surfaced, and by today, 4.1 million miles of road, 8.3 million lane miles, with the majority are all hard surface. So quite a change in 100 years. So we started paving roads. Now, when Route 66 was first formed, just a small percentage of it was paved or hard surfaced. It really was to Franklin Roosevelt with the New Deal and the WPA that put the work crews to work on hard surfacing Route 66. So by 1937, maybe I've read somewhere 1938, 100% of Route 66 was hard surfaced. Now, a lot of that was pavement, but some of it was also brick, because some of the states originally had brick highways, and you can still see some of that existing brick on some of the old Route 66 that you can still drive. But these work crews were the ones responsible for making it the first highway in the country to be paved from start to beginning. This is a section of road that was finished, about one of the last sections that was paved. And I had this picture. You can see the Pony Truss Bridge in the back going over the Canadian River in Bridgeport, Oklahoma. This picture. You see this bridge, too, in the movie Grapes of Wrath. If you watch that movie, you'll see this bridge in there. But kind of a fascinating story with that bridge. It's still there today. This is what it looked like not too long ago. And it has 38 of these spans on each side, so a total of 76. The Canadian River is dry some of the time, but then sometimes it's a torrential flow of water going underneath it. But they had to restore this bridge because it was not narrow. It was too narrow. It wasn't wide enough. So they just undertook that project and finished it and widened it to 24 feet. They used all the existing trusses to keep the historical part of it, but is now wide enough for the bigger semis and vehicles to be able to traverse it safely. So I love when they do something like this and keep a part of the old bridge instead of just making it boring concrete. So, and they painted it the original yellow color, so that's just fun to see. This kid just finished it up about a year ago. Of course, the Dust Bowl years, and this is really what was Route 66 was so famous for back in the 30s. So many people that lived in the Midwest, especially Kansas, Oklahoma, that had the dust issues. They lost their farms. They couldn't grow a crop. The Depression, it was just a very hard time in the United States. They'd heard that out in California there were jobs, and so they loaded up all their goodly possessions onto vehicles. And you can see here what a lot of these vehicles look like. The tires could hardly even hold the weight of all this stuff. They'd caravan down Route 66 to go out to California. And they would generally caravan together, so if somebody broke down, the other person behind them would help them out to get them up and going again. It was a very nurturing road, and that's why John Steinbeck in his movie, The Grapes of Wrath, or his book, The Grapes of Wrath, called it the Mother Road. It really was a motherly road that took care of people. A lot of new businesses were started on Route 66 during this time, and a lot of support, a lot of camps. A lot of cities would have camps. We didn't have a lot of hotels and motels back then. They're what they called summer camps or road camps that people could pitch a tent alongside the road. But the sad thing was when they got to California, they found there weren't any jobs. And the California people didn't want them there. So they ended up having to come back. And so a lot of travesty, a lot of sadness, but also a lot of support, and just a country that pulled together at a very, very difficult time in our history. And Route 66 was a very important part out here. This kind of shows, you didn't have the roads, and people didn't have the hotels, and people didn't have the money to be able to stay somewhere. They had to just pitch a tent alongside the road and cook their food and camp out alongside the road. So you see a lot of these rudimentary setups back in that time frame. Of course, World War II, Route 66 played a huge impact on World War II. It had just been finished by, just about 10 or 15 years, completely paved. And so when World War II broke out, it was a mainstream for military convoys to get to California. There were a lot of military bases out in California due to the nice climate. a lot of factories that supplied war supplies, so people took Route 66 for jobs out in California or to work on the bases. And so it was a very important highway during World War II to transport soldiers, military equipment, and staffing. Something we have a hard time even thinking about today was all the rationing that took place back in 1945. I can't imagine in today's society if we told people they could only buy so much gas and they only could drive 35 miles an hour and things like that. But back then, people did what they had to do to win the war. And we had ration books back then, and they were rationing out gas. The main reason they rationed out gas, not was they wanted to have plenty of gasoline for the war effort, but it was to conserve rubber on tires. Rubber was very hard to get during World War II. And each family was allowed 5 tires during the whole wartime. If your tire went out on you, too bad you're not going to be able to buy a new tire. You'd see people having burlap wrapped around their tires and things to try to protect the tires. You'd see cars that would just go up into stores all during World War II that wouldn't be driven. But anyway, the ration books for gasoline, if you had an A sticker, which most drivers did, you got about 3 to 4 gallons a week that you could use. And you had a ration book. You know, when you fill up with gas, you'd have to tear out so many of the stickers for your gas. If you had a B sticker, that was mean you had essential workers with you and it was a carpool situation. So you get a little bit more than maybe you might get 7 or 8 gallons a week. Critical workers got a sticker, a C sticker, which typically was like doctors, postal people, firemen, anybody that needed to be able to get to work in emergency situations typically had a C sticker. Then there was something called an X sticker. These are a little bit controversial. These were VIP stickers. And the ones that typically had these were your congressmen and your senators and people like that. So that didn't always go over so well, and they got unlimited gasoline. But most people had an A or B sticker unless they had a job like a physician or something like that. 35-mile-per-hour victory speed. This was just something I learned a few years ago, but that was the top speed limit you could go in the United States back then. They were very strict about that, and it was to conserve gas and also to conserve rubber on the tires. So from 1942 to August 1945, the speed limit in the United States was 35 miles per hour. Rationing also conserved tires due to the rubber shortage. We already talked about that. We already talked about the 5 tires per family. Also during World War II, they quit producing cars. Shortly after Pearl Harbor, they started rationing chromium and nickel and things like that and conserving those things. So cars that were still finishing off on the production line weren't supposed to have any chrome on them, so they made what they call blackout cars. So they would paint the bumpers instead of putting chrome on them, and they became very plain looking. Here's a car you can see, a blackout car. They're very rare cars. It's only sold for about a month or two before all auto production ceased in February of 1942. And the only people that could buy cars that were left were military people or high-ranking officials. What few cars were left were saved for the war effort. And so people had to drive whatever they had until after the war. So you can imagine after the war, there was a rush for people that wanted to buy new cars. But it took a while for factories to retool to build cars again. So there weren't really any new cars until about 1948, 49 that we started seeing some new models come out. I remember my grandfather was so excited when the local Nash dealer called him up and said, Bart, I got 3 Nashes in this morning. I got 2 black ones and a red one. So whoever gets here first gets their choice on the colors. So Grandma said, well, whatever you do, don't get the red one. I don't want a red car. So Grandpa went rushing to the Nash dealer. Well, by the time he got down, the only one left was the red one. So Grandpa bought the red Nash, came home and told Grandma, I don't think she would speak to him for a couple of days. She wouldn't even go and look at the car. Back then, you know, that was pretty flashy. And she says, Grandma told me this story. She goes, one morning I looked outside, the sun was just coming up, and it wasn't red, it was the most beautiful shade of burgundy. She goes, I just love that car. But she goes, I didn't talk to your grandpa for about 2 days when I thought I was going to be riding in a red car. But Grandpa says, hey, it was wheels and it was brand new, so we took it. So anyway, kind of a fun little story about getting a car after the war. And you know, all the plants during World War II were converted. Automobile plants were converted to either building planes or Jeeps or engines. This is Ford's Willow Run aircraft plant that was built, started World War II. It was the biggest assembly line plant in the world at that time, clicking out one B-24 bomber every 58 minutes. That's a lot. That's pretty rapid for cranking out. When we think about what all went into World War II to make that such a successful effort, all the people that pulled together, the people just did what they had to do to win the war, and everybody really pulled together. It was really amazing. After the war, kind of the heyday of Route 66, we started seeing things like drive-in restaurants, drive-in movie theaters. Everybody wanted to get in their car. They wanted to travel, especially the soldiers that had driven Route 66 during the war. They wanted to take their families and show them some of the amazing things that they'd seen on Route 66. So it really became a main highway for travelers during vacation times. The economy was coming back. People had money. It was a time of bright colors, fun clothing. Just all the appliances were turquoises and yellows. I mean, everything was just to celebrate winning the war and life going on. And Route 66 was a very part of that. Here's a family going camping, and I think that's a 62 Ford and the Shasta trailer. What fun. Did you get to see that 1952 trailer out here this morning? That was pretty cool. And of course, Bobby Troup came out with the song Route 66. He penned that as he was coming back from the war. So he's driving back to Los Angeles as he's driving through the different cities. And so that's how that all came about. And that song later made very famous by Nat King Cole. And hopefully you've all had a chance to hear that song. But it does, it just kind of follows the route in the song. President Eisenhower, our own President Eisenhower from Kansas, was kind of the one that responsible for ending Route 66, sadly, not intentionally that he wanted to kill off Route 66, but during the war he'd seen the Autobahn in Germany and how efficient that was, of getting traffic and military vehicles. And so he wanted to have interstate highway system in the United States, so that's what 1956 did, set up the interstate highway system, which then alleviated a lot of the old roads, like Route 66 was bypassed by new highways. And so that was kind of the death knell to Route 66. All the little communities that had sprung up on Route 66 got bypassed by these big interstates. The little communities died out, the businesses died out, and so Route 66 started fading away into history. The last city was Williams, Arizona, that got bypassed in June of 1985. That was officially the end of Route 66 when that last sign got taken down. In our travels on Route 66, oftentimes today you would see something like this. This is Route 66, and right beside it, in this case, is I-44 in Missouri or Illinois, Missouri, I guess it was. And but you'd find these little sections of road still existing, but you couldn't drive them. But it was the original Route 66 that you could still see. These kind of show you some other pictures. Now, some sections were pretty good, like that top picture that I took. That was Route 66. We were able to drive on that for quite a ways. I believe that was right outside of California. Other sections you can see had the little blockades off them, or just so rough you couldn't drive them. A lot of it's now marked by signs, historic Route 66. You'll even find shields on the original road. They'll say Route 66, so you know you're on the right road. Makes it a little easier to find the route if you're searching for it. We talked earlier about lodging on Route 66. Before there were motels, we had a lot of people just pull alongside the road and camp out. Even car companies would come up with kits that would fit on their cars that you could buy to turn their car into a little cabin overnight. But that's just, you look at that and you think, what a time to live through. Then these little cabins started sprouting up. And this is the Nelson Dream Village, which is in Lebanon, Missouri, no longer around. But they had a series of 8 little cabins, kind of in a horseshoe shape, and you could rent these cabins out. And some of these cabins were nicer than people, had creature features that their own homes didn't have. Maybe they even had an indoor restroom or running water. So some of them were pretty fancy. The Nelson Dream Village was pretty nice. Here is another shot of it. Had a beautiful water fountain out front. But no TVs back then, so people would oftentimes go out and sit on the porch because they didn't have air conditioning. And they would start talking to the people in the cabin next to them and find out where they're traveling. And just a real friendly time, just a leisurely way to travel and vacation back in those days. This little set of cabins outside of Oklahoma City that we took in 2002, I don't know if it's still there or not. I haven't looked for it since we took this picture. I really wanted to go back and explore them a little bit closer, but there was a chain link fence there, and I'm not a fan of snakes, and it looked like there might be snakes back there, so I stayed on the road and just took a picture from afar. But I want to try to find these again to see if they're even still there. But I'm sure that one time that was a little mom and pop motel cabins. This one, the famous Coral Court Motel in St. Louis. This was a very Art Deco modern motel built in the 1940s by the Carr family. It was one you could drive into a garage, get out your car in the garage and step into your hotel room, something you don't see much today at all, but back then that was something cutting edge. You had the cut glass or the glass block walls, the tile, the enameled tiles. It's just a beautiful modern motor court. Sadly, the motel, here you can see the garage doors and this was torn down in 1993, if I remember correctly. Route 66 Preservation Society tried to keep it, but they couldn't raise enough money to keep it. They did keep one unit. They took it apart piece by piece. It's now in the Transportation Museum in St. Louis, inside the building, put it back together. But the motel is now gone. There's a residential neighborhood in that area now. But a little bit of Kansas history around this hotel. Back in 1954, there was a young man by the name of Bobby Greenlease, whose dad was a very wealthy Cadillac dealer in Kansas City and Oklahoma. And his little 5-year-old son got kidnapped from a private school. And there was a ransom, I think it was for, I can't remember, 300 or 600,000, a lot of money back in 1948, I think it was, or 1954, I guess it was. And anyway, the father ignored the police's wish and paid the money. So they said, "No, don't pay the ransom, you don't know." Well, he paid the money trying to get his son back. Little did he know his son already been murdered. And so he never got his son back, and they never found the money. Well, they found half of it. And when they caught up with the people that did the murder, the girl and guy, they were held up in this little Coral Court hotel in St. Louis. And so for a lot of years, since they only recovered half the money, they thought maybe the other half was buried somewhere on the grounds of the Coral Court. So people would stay there and try to find the money, but it never did find it. Well, later it found out that one of the police department officers had stole it. They'd found it and kept half of it. So he spent some time in prison after that. But anyway, a little bit of Kansas history behind the Coral Court in St. Louis. This Blue Swallow Motel is the last existing original motel on Route 66, the oldest existing original. It's in Tucumcari, New Mexico. We stayed there back in 2002. We always tried to stay in the mom and pop hotels whenever we could, and because of the history of it, we wanted to stay there. And we stayed there for one night, and that was enough. It was a little seedy, but since that time, they've done a lot of renovation to it, and they've restored it. And this is just a recent picture of it. They restuccoed everything, and the new owners have remodeled the inside and trying to keep the history of the outside with the shells and keep as much of it as original as possible, but really clean it up. Did a beautiful job, replaced all the neon on it. It's really cleaned up, much nicer. And so I think we'll try to stay there again sometime. Elaine, I'm just warning you right now, we're going to probably stay there again sometime. But it's a fun little place, a lot of history behind it. One of the fun things when we stayed there was they had these rotary phones in the room. And I thought that was so fun. They still worked. You could still use them. But I thought it was really humorous. I didn't get a picture of it. I wish I would. But right beside the phone was instructions on how to use it. Because a lot of people didn't know how to do the rotary phones. And I caught Caitlin out here on a rotary phone, and she didn't know how to use it either. So she got a lesson on how to use the rotary phone that we've got here at the museum on display. So, but anyway, that was kind of a fun little thing that they had in the hotel room, which I thought was fun. This Boots Courts in Carthage, Missouri. It was built in the 1930s. Clark Gable and Carol Lombard actually stayed here on their honeymoon, and they stayed there a couple times during their marriage. We were through there in the early 90s, and it looked like the picture at the top, and they put a gable roof on it. It looked horrible. And it was kind of a seedy-looking place. I think it was rented by the month by then. And it was just really kind of sad to see. Well, since that time, it was bought by a couple that restored it. They took the gabled roof back off, completely restored the rooms, and put the neon back in, brought it back to its original 1930s, 40s look. It's really a beautiful place now. And you can stay there again. The rent rooms out by the night. So we've never stayed there. So maybe someday we'll have to try that out too. But that's in Carthage, Missouri. Yeah, it's another warning, Elaine. So. This is a fun place we stayed at, this Holbrook Wigwam Village. There's two of these still on Route 66. One's in Holbrook and one's out in California. This is the rougher of the two. The one out in California is pretty snazzy. Still original, but it's got palm trees and a swimming pool and stuff by it. This one's still pretty much 1940s. In fact, they even parked some old vintage cars out in front. The furniture inside, this series of cabinets still owned by the same family that built it in the 1940s. We stayed out there. This was the furniture that his dad had actually built for the teepee wigwam rooms. Still original furniture, so it's kind of rustic, but it's 1940s. The old modern communities, there was an air conditioner, window air conditioner, which wouldn't have been back in the 1940s. I took this picture of the bathroom because I thought it was kind of funny because the mirror, is angled because of the shape of the teepees, which made it really fun shaving in the morning because you're kind of like this. But the same with the shower. But anyway, it's just fun to stay in these places and experience them. That was a thing back in those days. These were all designed to draw the people off the road to get them to stay. And if you had a family with kids in the car, you can bet if they saw a room shaped like teepees, you're going to probably end up staying in that motel that night. This Munger Moss Hotel in Lebanon, Missouri, we stayed there, a beautifully kept motel. When we stayed there, it was still owned by the same family that built it. And sadly, the lady that owned it passed away a couple years ago, and it closed down for a while. I just read that somebody has bought this and is going to maintain it. It's no longer going to be quite the same type of motel. They're going to have some monthly rental things long-term like apartments, but they're going to still have a few rooms that you can rent nightly. But they promised to keep everything original. They sold the Munger Moss sign to the city of Lebanon, so Lebanon can maintain it. But it's not going to be torn down. It's still going to exist, which I'm glad to see. But it sadly won't be what it was when it was still owned by the same family. But we'll see. We'll see what it does. We stayed in they had a Route 66 themed room when we were there, which was a lot of fun. My wife laughs at me for taking this picture, but I thought that was pretty cool. The blue tile and the coral tub and stuff all from that period. I just thought that was so retro looking, and it was very, very clean. So I just thought it was kind of fun. She goes, "I can't believe you're taking a picture of a bathroom." I said, "Well, you know me, I take weird pictures." But I thought it was kind of fun. So hopefully they've kept this. This El Rancho Hotel in Gallup, New Mexico still exists. It's still a very popular hotel along the route. A lot of celebrities stayed here because it was a popular place to stay when they're out there filming Western movies. So if you go in and stay there, on the doors it tells you which celebrity stayed in that room. And a little bit about everybody lived in Hollywood stayed in this hotel at one time. So it's beautiful inside. It's just gorgeous. So if you ever get a chance, stop in there and see that. This is sadly one that we saw back in 2002. It no longer exists. It was torn down. Groom, Texas, when it got bypassed, just blew away. I mean, there's nothing left there. This hotel, this motor court, was still standing, but is now gone. Gas stations. We talk about gas stations back in the day. We have to talk about Phillips 66 because it has a Kansas connection. The Phillips Petroleum Company, which got started about 1915-16, if I remember right, came out with the Phillips 66 gasoline in 1927. And the history behind that's really fascinating. They had this new type of petroleum, and they were trying to decide on a name for the gasoline. And they were test driving it in a car down in Oklahoma, and they realized that they were going 66 miles an hour in this car on Route 66. And the gravity of the gasoline was 66. I don't know what gravity of gasoline means, was 66. So they thought, Phillips 66, this makes sense. So that's how the name came to be for that brand of gasoline. Well, the first Phillips 66 gas station was actually in Wichita, Kansas, and that gas station still does exist. It's on Central Avenue. It was built in 1927, and this is a picture of it at the bottom there. But the first Phillips 66 station actually began in Wichita, Kansas. This guy by the name of Ray Dietz got kind of inventive back in the 1950s. A lot of cars back then, broke down very frequently. You had flat tires, you had cars overheating, vapor locking, there was always something going wrong. And they couldn't always get to your gas station. So Raymond Dietz thought, well, I'll go to them. So he loaded up a van with all kinds of stuff, gasoline, oil, fan belts, everything, just drove up and down the highway. If somebody's broken down, he'd pull in and help them out, and did a good business that way. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Certified clean restrooms. Don't we wish we still had that today? Phillips Petroleum actually hired what they called highway hostesses, and they would be paid to drive up and down Route 66 and other highways to Phillips Petroleum stations and inspect the bathrooms. And if it passed the nurse's inspection, you got a certified clean restroom sign to hang in the window. And if it didn't, you didn't get that sign. Well, if you were a family traveling and saw that clean restroom sign, you're more likely going to pull in there and buy gas and use the restroom. Otherwise, you're going to drive right on by it. But, you look at this would never go over today. But wouldn't it be great if it did? Because we know what restrooms look like today in a lot of these places. I just thought this last picture was kind of fun. The 1960s era filling stations, you got the Vendorama in the background. You could buy sandwiches, the full service. I can't quite read how much it is per gallon of gas, but I'm going to guess it's not $3 or $4. It's probably 50 cents. But anyway, I thought that was kind of a cool picture. This Soulsby Shell Station is still around. It's in Mount Olive, Illinois. Henry Soulsby opened this up in 1926. He passed away. His son and daughter-in-law operated it for a while. It's now closed. I think they're trying to turn it into like a gift shop or something. I haven't been there for a while to know what it is, but I know it still exists. But still in the same location as it's always been there on Route 66. And a very nicely restored little Shell station. This one we came across, the one on the left's in Odell, Illinois. We came across that one when we were traveling on Route 66. It was very nicely restored. The one on the right we came across in Chandler, Oklahoma. It was closed and deserted. There's actually a Century 21 sign. It's not in this picture, but it was right beside it. So I thought, oh boy, what's going to happen to this? They're going to tear it down, or what's going to happen to it? I later found out that they didn't tear it down, that the city of Chandler bought it and restored it. They decided that the garage building on the left side was built in the 60s. They tore that part of it down to bring back the 1930 building that you see there on the right side and restored it. And this is the result of that. I'm not too sure what I think of that. I know they painted them back then, but quite honestly, I think the natural brick looked a lot better. I think they'd been better off if they had just put the colored roof on it like the original and left the building brick. But anyway, that's what it looks like today. So anyway, it still stands. It wasn't torn down. This Shamrock Inn, or a U-Drop Inn in Shamrock, Texas, built in 1938. Very ultra Art Deco building, the Conoco station, the cafe. It's a very popular place, kind of out of place in Shamrock, Texas. Looks, you see something like this maybe in a big city, not in the middle of Shamrock, Texas, which isn't a very big town. But anyway, that's what it was. When we were through there in 2002, it was closed. The restaurant had closed. It was pretty tired looking. There was a sign. You can see me standing over there reading the sign. It said, full restoration to be completed by August of 2002. And I looked at the building and I thought, there isn't even anything going on here. This isn't going to happen. They didn't get any money, or it's just not going to happen. Well, lo and behold, they must have got the money, because they did get it restored, and it turned out just gorgeous. It's now the office for the Chamber of Commerce for the city of Shamrock. The old restaurant's no longer open for restaurant business, but I guess you can rent it out for events. So if you got like a civic club or something like that, you want a place to meet, you can rent out the old cafe. The neon's all been replaced. So this is a great example of someone taking the time and the money to just preserve these beautiful old buildings. They're such an important part of our culture. This Launching Pad Cafe, we ate there a couple times when we were traveling in Wilmington, Illinois. Sadly, I just read just recently that's closed. I don't know what happened. I guess the current owners were having some issues, management issues and whatnot. And they tried to sell it. They wanted $750,000 for the place. They didn't get the money. Anyway, the Launching Pad restaurant's still there, but it's deserted and falling apart. But the Gemini Giant was saved. They actually sold that and auctioned that off for $275,000. And the Preservation Society of Wilmington, I guess, bought that, and they have moved it now to the park to preserve it. They had it completely restored, and that was through a donation. Somebody donated the money to the Preservation Society for them to be able to buy that and keep it to get it away so it wouldn't be destroyed. Because it's such a landmark. People remember that going down Route 66 for decades. So it would have been a real shame if it would have disappeared completely. Of course, the best case scenario would have been if somebody would have bought the cafe and kept it on where it had been, but that wasn't going to happen. Ted Drew's in St. Louis, very popular place, built in the 1940s for their frozen custard. If you go there in the summertime, we plan to wait for about 20 minutes in line because it's just packed. But it's just delicious frozen custard. In fact, I understand Dairy Queen got the idea for their blizzards from Ted Drew's. But we've stopped and eaten there, had a dessert there numerous times, and it has those little fun little wooden icicles on the road. Ted Drew's just passed away last year, and I was reading up. I thought, boy, I hope it doesn't disappear. But I guess his son and daughter-in-law bought it or own it now and are going to maintain it. So it's going to stay in the family, so that's good. But it's a real popular place. They have a couple locations in St. Louis. I guess they were asked if they would franchise it, and he said, absolutely not. It's got to stay just local St. Louis. So it's just there, but it does a heck of a business. It's on Route 66 there in St. Louis. This Old Diamonds, at one time, was the biggest restaurant on Route 66. Original restaurant was diamond shaped, where it got its name. That burned down in the 1940s, late 1940s. They built this new building to be more weather resistant and fire resistant and things like that. Opened up and did a booming business. It was at a great intersection of Route 66, another major highway. Well, when I-44 came in, it bypassed it and it met demise. It later became Tri-County Truck Stop. We stopped by there in 2017, and the building was still standing. It was all boarded up, and kind of got the feeling we shouldn't be there. I mean, you felt like you were being watched. You know, it felt uncomfortable, so we didn't stay there very long. Sadly, last year got hit by a tornado that hit just there south of St. Louis, and so I'm sure it's going to be gone now. They won't be able to do anything more with this in the condition it's in. But anyway, that's what it looks like today, sadly. The Chain of Rocks Bridge, one of my favorite places on Route 66. This was the bypass around St. Louis from about 1930 to about 1965. Interesting 22-degree bend in the middle of that bridge, a very narrow bridge. The reason for the bend in the bridge was there are a couple of water intake towers. You can barely see them up here from the 1800s, and there's a ledge of rocks that runs along there, and that made it very difficult for barges and boats to navigate through those pillars. So they figured if they put the 22-degree bend in the middle of the bridge, they could line the pilers for the bridge up where the boats could navigate through there as safely as they could. But even with that, it was still very difficult. Eventually, they built a channel around the side of it so that people could bypass that section. But anyway, the bridge survived. It was closed down in 1965. They built a new Chain of Rocks bridge just right next to it. It carries I-270, Interstate 270 traffic. You can still see this bridge off to the side. We visited there a couple of times, and the first time we visited, you didn't have any qualm about walking across it and felt pretty safe. The last time we visited it, there were warning signs: do not leave your car unattended. You are being watched. All this stuff. You just didn't feel very comfortable being out on there. And I thought, boy, this isn't good. They turned into TrailNet had bought it as a biking trail and a walkway, which was really great. But if you don't feel safe, it's not going to be any good. Well, fortunately, there's a very old picture of it. It used to be a toll bridge. They did get the money. They've restored, made it much more safe. They completely redid the Missouri side, put in all new this park, picnic tables, restrooms, security cameras, everything now. So it's now safe again. You can see the new Chain of Rocks bridge, they're resurfacing or something on the left. But it's very nice, so I'm anxious to go back and see it again. But it's about a mile across the bridge, but it's fun to walk out on there. You can't drive on it. They open it up maybe once or twice a year for special car events for people to be able to drive across. I'd love to be able to do that. But they saved the bridge. It hasn't been torn down. It's just a fun old Route 66 bridge. This road, the only reason I took a picture of this road, this is just south of St. Louis, and I thought it was kind of funny because I wish I had taken a picture of the sign. Right around that corner, there's a sign that said dead end. And I thought, okay, I'll turn around. Well, at the very end of the road was a cemetery. And I thought, I wonder if that was planned or what. But anyway, I thought that was kind of humorous. That's in the Route 66 park there just south of St. Louis. This section near Lebanon, Missouri, called Hooker's Cut, this was pretty pretty famous back in the day to be able to cut that big limestone or rock out of that hill to get this road poured through there. It's also one of the first sections to be four-laned on Route 66. That was because Fort Leonard Wood was very close, and we had World War II, so they were trying to four-lane as much of Route 66 as they could at that time to help military transportation. But interesting thing is, you'll notice there's curbs on the center thing, and even on the side over here, there's little curbs. They thought that would help with water drainage, but what did it do? It flipped cars. If they hit that too fast, the cars would flip over. So it ended up being very dangerous. But you can still drive this section of Route 66. The funny thing is, the day that I took this picture, Elaine and I, there was a bunch of construction on I-44, and we were just following our guidebook, and we said, well, take this exit to get to Hooker's Cut. So we did. We got off the road, and we drove over here, and we found this. We were able to follow this for like 8 or 9 miles, then get back on I-44 and bypassed all the bumper-to-bumper traffic that was backed up on I-44 from construction. I thought people only knew they could go 50 yards over and catch old 66 and bypass it. But they didn't do that because it was not a safe road for a bunch of traffic on. But we lucked out that day. It was a beautiful little drive, had the road to ourselves. This little section called the Sidewalk Highway is down in Oklahoma. It's about a 3.5-mile stretch. Dates from the 1919 to 2026. Still exists today, but it was at one time a part of Route 66. It's only 9 feet wide, and you can drive it. It's sometimes it's covered over with gravel. You have to look for it, but then you'll re-see it again. So it's a pretty rough road. But back in those days when they were trying to pave as much road as they could, there wasn't a lot of money. The states didn't have a lot of money. And so they figured out in this section, we can do 1 lane twice as far as we can do 2 lanes. So that's what they did. So instead of going 1.5 miles, they did 1 lane, 3.5 miles. So, but you can still drive that. Of course, back in those days, you got the Model Ts and those smaller cars, you pass each other pretty safely without any problem. Big cars today, that'd be a real issue. But kind of fun that it's still there, and you can still drive on it. This little Marsh Arch Bridge is the last surviving Marsh Arch Bridge, Rainbow Arch Bridge on Route 66. They just restored this year, but they just had a grand revealing of it just a few months ago. It goes over Brush Creek down near Riverton, Kansas, and so it's just a fun little bridge to drive across in a very elegant style. Merrimack Caverns is a vacationer spot along in Missouri. Kind of a tourist trap, I guess. It's a fun cave to visit. We've been there numerous times. It's fun for kiddos and grandkids to visit and see that. I came across this sticker up at the top left corner. It's just about 2 by 2 inch ticket, but I thought it was kind of fun. It dates back from the 1950s. But if you read it there, it says, having entered the famous Jesse James jungle room of Merrimack Caverns, the bearer whose signature appears hereon has been made a member of the Merrimack Caverns Atomic Bomb Shelters Club. And as such, the holder is entitled to utilize the facility of Merrimack Caverns in the event of an atomic bomb raid. That's the story of our time back there. But anyway, if you ever get a chance to visit Merrimack Caverns, and Lester Dill, who owned Merrimack Caverns, was famous for coming up with the barn painting of the advertising that you'd see on barns. And you'd see these Merrimack Cavern signs on the side of the barns all across Missouri, Illinois. And so he was the one that started that whole movement. The famous Blue Well in Catoosa, Oklahoma. Maybe some of you have seen this. This picture up on the left lane I just took about a year ago when we stopped by there again. But Hugh Davis built this for his wife back in 1974. For whatever reason, his wife loved whales, and they had this pond on their place, so he built this giant well for her to use as a swimming thing. It has a diving board off the tail of it and things like that. Well, it was so close to Route 66, so what was happening is people were pulling off the road and going in and not asking permission and just using it as a swimming hole. So Hugh Davis said, well, let's just open it up as a public venue and we'll sell tickets. People can come swim here. So they did that for a number of years. They had this giant ark built right beside it where they had alligators and snakes and stuff, so it's kind of a tourist trappy thing. But the well still is there. The ark's still there too, but it's in pretty bad repair. But you can still walk out on the well, and they don't let you swim in it anymore. You really wouldn't want to swim in that water anyway. But it's kind of fun to see that well still exist. Eisler Brothers, now known as Nelson's Old Riverton Store, is the longest running general store on Route 66 to this day. It was built in 1925, so a year before Route 66 even was commissioned, and it's still run and operated by Scott Nelson. It's a fun place to stop in. They've got a little grocery store. They sell sandwiches, gift shop. It's just really a cool little place that's been on Route 66 in Kansas since day one. The big round barn in Arcadia, Oklahoma. This is Route 66 right in front of it. It's just a massive place built in 1898. You can go in there and tour that. It's just amazing. You go up on the second floor. That big dome on top, there are no supports that come down to the floor. It's all, I don't know how they did it all with this wood framing. It's just this huge area. I guess they hold square dances and all kinds of things up there. Just fascinating to see the architecture behind that barn that's now 130-some years old. Of course, you bypass a lot of, on Route 66, beautiful things like the Painted Desert, Petrified Forest in Arizona. It's all on Route 66. Drive-in movie theater. You can still go to a drive-in movie theater in Carthage, Missouri. It's open right now, Friday, Saturday, Sunday evenings. You can watch movies there. You listen to them over your radio now. You don't hang the thing on your window like you used to. But I looked, it was $5 per kids, $10 for adults, and under 5 free, or however you can hide in your trunk. But and they have the refreshment stand stuff just like they did back in the day. But an original drive-in movie theater still shows movies. This one in Azusa one time held 1,510 cars. That's a lot of cars. Beautiful, beautiful old theater. Sadly closed down in 2001 and was torn down. The sign, they did keep the sign. You can kind of see it there in the lower right corner, and that still exists today and lights up with the neon, but unfortunately it's now a parking lot. Of course, the movie Cars, all about Route 66, and when Pixar was working on the film, they drove up and down Route 66 to get ideas, stopped in Galena, Kansas, and you all remember Tow Mater from the movie. Well, this truck here in Galena, Kansas was inspiration for that. And they saw this sitting over in the field, the hood was off of it, and so they stopped and talked to the owners and asked if they could use that for their inspiration. They said, by all means. So they have that truck still parked there on the corner of Route 66 as you come into Galena. I happened to be there the day that the chamber president or somebody was there, and they said, well, you can hop in and get your picture taken. So I did, and but it's kind of fun to see the truck that was originally the inspiration for that movie. Budville Motel, or Trading Post, still in New Mexico, is now closed. Interesting story behind that. I'm not going to go into that. It's a lengthy story, but just Google Budville, Bud Neil Rice, and it's quite an interesting story about how he treated people and how he got murdered, and it's just a long story, but it's fascinating. Here it is, Jackrabbit Trading Post in Arizona. Back in the day, you could drive up and down the highway from Missouri through Arizona. You'd see little signs, little Jackrabbit signs at 423 miles. You keep seeing these signs every so often until you finally got to the Jackrabbit Trading Post, and here it is, you finally arrived. Well, it was a little trading post about the size of this event space. And you could go in there and you could buy souvenirs. You could buy their very famous cherry cider, which every time we've been there, they haven't had any. But I guess it was sticky and a mess to clean out the machines. They didn't like to do it. So, but it's still open, and it's kind of a city-looking place off the road, but it's a fun place to experience. And the sign's still out there, the original "Here It Is" sign. And you can see the trading post down there in the lower left. It's not much to look at, but it's kind of a fun place to go. And you can sit on that giant rabbit on the left, get your picture taken. Then you get to the end of Route 66 in Santa Monica, California, on the pier. Actually, the road ends about 2 or 3 blocks away, but being good tourism people, they made the pier the ending route for Route 66, and they've got a sign there that says official end of Route 66. So anyway, thanks to the interstate highway system, it is now possible to travel across the country from coast to coast without seeing anything. From the interstate, America is all steel guardrails and plastic signs, and they replace looks and feels and sounds and smells like every other place. Charles Kuralt. And these are the cars today that we have, and these are the highways we get to drive on. And these are the cars we used to get to drive, and the highways that we used to get to drive on. These are all Route 66. This is in Missouri, fading into history. So what's the future of Route 66? Well, it's still striving. You know, this Pop 66 has now probably been open about 20 years, but when we stopped by there, when I took this picture, it was pretty new. In fact, it hadn't even opened up yet, but it's all generated solar powered. They sell a lot of pop. In fact, we've got some in our gift shop here, Route 66 Pop. But you can buy sandwiches and stuff in there, fill your car up with gas, plug your car in to get it charged. Giant soda fountain or soda bottle out in front that has neon that swirls around it. That's probably 50, 100 feet tall with a straw coming out of the top of it. It's really cool. That's about a mile down from that big round barn that we just saw in Arcadia. I kind of thought it was interesting here, you know, Route 60 goes electric. This was a hotel we stayed at in Tucumcari, and there were some Teslas plugged up to the charging stations there. Some really beautiful sculptures. This is in Tucumcari. This one they just finished in Tulsa. This is in Tulsa. We just took this picture last summer. This couple was from, they're from Finland, is that right, honey? Do you remember? They were from overseas somewhere, and I just asked if they were wanting to get their picture taken. I said, well, I'll take your picture. We got to carry on a conversation. You come across more European travelers traveling this road when you travel it. You'll find Greyhound busloads full of international travelers. They all come over here to experience Route 66. It's just a blast. But it's a fun road to travel. And Tulsa's very proud of their heritage, so they do a lot of Route 66 stuff. These pictures we took a few years ago when we were traveling it. Most of those were in Tucumcari, the top two on the left. But things were very clean, nice, being restored. So anyway, like I said, it was decommissioned in 1985. However, the road did not die. The resurgence of energy is finding the old highway with travelers not only from the United States, but throughout the world traveling the old route to the magic of yesteryear. I believe that everyone should take a break from their daily lives and travel historic Route 66. It will open your eyes to what America is all about, who we are, where we came from, and what we should be striving to preserve. Capture the Magic is still out there. And that's the end. If anybody has any questions, I'll do my best to find an answer. Yes?
Did you have to call ahead on those reservations for some of those?
We did. Any of those mom and pop little motels, they get booked very quickly. And so, yeah, we had to make reservations ahead of time. We found that out after the first year or two we traveled. We didn't. We just traveled as far as we go, and we tried to stop and find someplace. That sometimes proved to be very difficult. So we started in future years making reservations. So, yeah. Yeah, Ron?
I found out 2 times that I've done Route 66. The first time was taking my 66 or 67 Mustang, and it was all about the cars. And there are lots of car museums, and unfortunately, every time my Ford met a Chevy car, the Chevy owners always felt like they outdid, the Ford car. The second time, I just took my pickup, and now it was about the communities and all of the activities. So it was a very different slant on Route 66 according to, was it about the car or was it about the communities?
Yeah, I could see where you could run into that. We always drove a newer car because we didn't want to have any car troubles on that old road because some of those roads are pretty desolate, but we always drove our new car. But you'd always pass a lot of bikers and a lot of vintage cars and things like that, so you do see a lot of that on the highway. The one thing that I will say is we never really encountered anybody that was negative. Everybody's always very friendly. Remember this one place we stopped at, and there was a group of bikers there, and I thought, oh boy, I'm a little bit worried. Nicest group of people you'd ever want to visit with, just had a blast. And it turns out that half of those group were from overseas. They'd rented a bike in the United States and were traveling it. But yeah, very friendly road. I mean, occasionally you get to an area that, a place that the people were rude but their reputations generally followed them, and so even the guidebooks would warn you to avoid those places. So, but yeah, that's a great thought. Yeah, Lowell?
The Diamonds Restaurant.
Uh-huh.
In '59, when I joined the Army, I went by bus from Indianapolis to Fort Leonard Wood. And that was the last stop before you got to Fort Leonard Wood.
Yeah. Did you eat there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of sad to see what happened to it now, isn't it? Yeah. But it got a direct hit by a tornado and still standing, so it was built pretty good. Yes.
Yeah, we traveled the entire route a couple of years ago, and we used this particular book, and it was dynamite.
Easy 66. I love it.
It makes you can go from east to west or west to east with
Did you have
this.
to turn it around the other way? Do you? Do you?
And it's just a great book. She was my navigator, so we were pulling off the interstate where it's supposed to, and we traveled every little whip snitch, that was left, but
Yeah.
great book.
If you follow those guidebooks, you really get to see some things you would miss. And sometimes you have to look a little bit. I mean, there was a place called John's Modern Cabins. I remember it was in Missouri somewhere. If we hadn't followed the guidebook, we went down this deserted road that was Route 66 originally, but it was pretty deserted. And we thought we were lost, and all of a sudden those cabins were down there. You would have never found them if you hadn't had the guidebook. Yes.
The author of that book?
Of this book? Well, who's the author on that?
Jerry McClanahan.
Jerry McClanahan? I can't remember the name of the book that we use. It's similar to that.
Yeah, this guy's down in Oklahoma, and every 5 years he updates the book.
Okay.
In fact, we stopped at his shop and he scratched out a few things in this edition.
Doug, have you been to the Pontiac Museum in Pontiac, Illinois?
I can't remember if we've been, I know we went to several in Oklahoma. I'm trying to remember if we went to one in Pontiac. I might have.
Pontiac is on the route,
Yeah.
and their whole town is about, a guy moved there, and there's a whole museum of just Pontiacs.
Yeah.
It's well worth the stop to go there.
Mike's going to be making a road trip there with his Pontiac. So, yeah, I remember there was something in the Route 66 publication about that. So, yeah, thank you. Well, thank you all again for coming out. Thank you for making MDCC amazing.